All right, we'll have Brad Edwards with ESPN College Game Day on ESPN Radio, and Brad will join us in the next couple of minutes. Out of Bounds, 105.9 The Zone, ESPN. You can watch the show right now on YouTube. Search Out of Bounds Sports. Recapping the weekend, huge NFL weekend. Of course, the Saints won. That's kind of the local team. Not kind of. I guess it is. Well, speaking of, hit us up right now. I'd like to know from right now with our listeners, who is your NFL team? Mississippi Ag text line, 601-885-3776. I love doing this. I mean, we've been blown away with the response over the years. Mississippi Ag text line, 601-885-3776. The show is brought to you by Capital Preservation Services. Todd Martis and his team, professionals, they help professionals increase revenue and minimize tax liability. They work with medical professionals, lawyers, and business owners. Earn more and keep more with Capital Preservation Services. They utilize a team of tax planners and specialized attorneys to stand behind their work. Capital Preservation Services. Todd Martis and his team will help you earn more and keep more with Capital Preservation Services. We're live in the Bank Plus studio, Blake Mania, with me. I'm your host, Bo Bounds.
Yes, sir.
Mississippi State won in basketball at Vanderbilt. That's a big deal. They've got some of the best guards in the league in Iverson Molinar and DJ Stewart. And then they've got some nice pieces, and we'll see. But Ben Howland's done a good job. He really has, considering, they didn't have Molinar the first two games of the year, and then they didn't have him another game. But when he play again, he's the guy. We've talked about it. I don't care if it's State, Ole Miss, whoever. Point guard, point guard, point guard. And Ben had to weather the storm of Lamar Peters and Nick Weatherspoon, and you just didn't know what you were going to get. Just too much up and down and so on. And Molinar is a dude. He's got dude qualities. He's evidently an outstanding kid and smart and understands what Ben wants him to do. And he gets his here's an idea. He gets his teammates involved. Tonight we've got the national championship game. Your Alabama Crimson Tide against the Ohio State Buckeyes. So Mack Jones is the QB for Bama. Devontae Smith, Heisman Trophy winner for Bama. And then you've got Justin Fields and some other dudes for Ohio State. Both rosters loaded with NFL talent. Nick Saban has been coaching forever. Ryan Day is super young. He took Urban Meyer's place when Urban had another meltdown. And Ryan Day has yet to win a title, and Saban's going for his 7th title. I hope it's a good game. Man, I hope it goes deep into the fourth quarter and we get a good one and all kinds of momentum swings and fun and so on. And we'll see what happens tonight. The game's in Miami, and Bama is now an 8.5-point favorite. Is that too many? We'll see. But South Beach, I'm sure, is rocking, and we'll see what shakes out here on the Natty game. We welcome in Brad Edwards, College Game Day on ESPN Radio. All right, Brad, it's here. Saban's going for his 7th Natty and Ryan Day for his 1st. What are your expectations for the game? Do you expect this to be competitive start to finish?
I think it really depends so much on, I guess the way I would phrase it is availability and viability. The first thing is availability. How many of the players that have really been out there for most of the season will be out there tonight? There have been rumors, obviously, last week that Ohio State was dealing with some more COVID issues. And, how many players, if any, will they be missing? How important are those guys? And is Justin Fields going to be ready to go? We assume that he is. I'm sure we would have heard by now if he wasn't able to practice or anything as a result of what happened, that big hit he took in the semi. But then that's when we get to viability. So of the guys who are available to play, two in particular, I think how well they're able to play, how close to 100% they are is going to also have a big impact. And so Fields is one of those. Is he going to be in a position health-wise where he's able to be the weapon that he normally is as a runner? Or will his injuries put him in a place mentally where he's really, trying to guard against taking big hits? And if that's the case, then obviously their offense can't be quite as good as it is most of the time. The other guy, as far as viability, is Jalen Waddle. And I don't have to explain to your offense what his value is if he's anywhere close to 100% and can get out there, and what that would do for Alabama's offense against a secondary that really has struggled for much of this season. And you figure even without him, is going to have a hard time matching up with Alabama. So I think those things, the availability and the viability, are going to really be a big part of the answer as to how competitive will this game be. I think if those things kind of go in Ohio State's favor, then it has the potential to be a really high-scoring and competitive national championship game.
75.5 is the over-under. Brad talked about the Ohio State secondary. They're 106th in pass defense. And I think where Brad's going is if they drop Waddle into the mix, and he can go at all 80, 90%, man, does that put pressure on the Ohio State defense. What do you think about Ohio State's offense? Let's just say Justin Fields is 90+%, Brad.
Yeah.
How do you think the Ohio State offense will go against this Bama defense if Justin Fields is 90+%?
Well, I think the first big question you have to ask is how well will they be able to run the ball without needing Fields to be a part of it? Because Trey Sermon, the last two games against Northwestern in the Big Ten Championship and against Clemson in the semi, has absolutely gone nuts. And it's very similar to what Ezekiel Elliott did back in 2014, where, he was good in the regular season, but not anything special. I mean, he wasn't, first team all Big Ten. And then all of a sudden you get to the conference championship game and he just starts going off, and he carried it all the way through the national championship. And obviously it turned out he was a pretty good running back. Well, Trey Sermon, I mean, we'd seen him before at Oklahoma. We knew he was a good running back, but he didn't stand out among the group at OU and really had not stood out at Ohio State until this stretch. And so, the question is, can they run between the tackles on Alabama as effectively as they have in the previous games? Because if they do, it's going to open up some other stuff. I think the other thing that I look at with Ohio State is how much will they use Sermon in the passing game as well as their tight ends. Overall in the season, they have not thrown a lot to the running backs and tight ends, but that is the glaring weakness of Alabama's defense. And if you look at the only two times they faced an offense that's in the same neighborhood with Ohio State, and those would be Ole Miss and Florida, those teams have torched them. And a big part of that has been, their passing to those two positions. Alabama's linebackers and safeties just, I guess coverage is optional to them against tight ends and running backs. They just, sometimes they go stand near them, and other times they just leave them completely uncovered. And I don't know what it is about it, but they really cannot cover those guys to save their lives. And in the semifinal against Clemson, the running backs and tight ends for Ohio State combined for 9 catches for 134 yards. So they can and will throw to those guys, and I think they can have a lot of success doing it. And so, and then that's important, because if you look at Ohio State over the course of the season, their two primary weapons on offense are their top two wideouts, Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson. And Alabama's strength defensively is their two corners, Patrick Surtain and Josh Jobe. And so in theory, most of the time they can match up on those two receivers. And if that's the case, it's not like they're going to completely take them out of the game, but they're certainly going to impact what has been the strength of Ohio State's offense. So I think they're going to have to go elsewhere if they're going to keep up with Alabama for 4 quarters. It's going to have to be Trey Sermon and those tight ends playing a big role.
Okay, why do you think so? Saban is recruiting even better, right? I mean, Saban's recruiting. He's number 1 or 2. If you took the composite after this class, he'd be number 1. But I think going into the season, Georgia was. But I mean, it was just by a hair. Why do you think Bama can score at will on anybody, and yet now they struggle to stop people, whereas 8, 9, 10 years ago, they held people to like 11.8 points per game, Brad.
Yeah, part of it is just the way that the game has changed. I mean, you saw what happened to Georgia's defense, which I think, when at full strength, is the best defense in college football, and what Alabama and Florida did to them this season. It's just hard for even the best defenses to defend the best offenses now, and I think that's going to be the case moving forward, unless there's some significant rules change. I think that's going to be the case for quite a while to come. But the things that Alabama is struggling with are, and look, it has not been as bad in the second half of the season as it was early, and especially in the Ole Miss game. But early in the season, they were not only struggling with blown assignments as far as coverage, but also missed tackles, and a lot of those at the second and third levels, where you typically expect Alabama to be pretty solid in that area, and they have been in the second half of the season, and so I think that's an important part of this as well. But look, I mean, one thing you can say for Alabama is that they have had a lot of experience in these really high-scoring, back-and-forth games. And as much as you would think that a team that has kind of been so defensively focused as they have for much of Saban's tenure would have a hard time in those situations, they have won a very high percentage of those track meets that they've been in. And so I'm not saying they want to be in one. I don't think anybody wants to be in a game where your defense is going to give up a lot of points. But they're comfortable being in them, and they believe in their offense. And, you mentioned the recruiting, and, we all know how well Alabama recruits, and it seems like they just, get their pick. Although you mentioned Georgia and certainly LSU and Ohio State. Those schools will get some guys that Alabama wants, but they're still loaded. But it's funny when you look at this matchup and some of the key players in Alabama's offense. I was looking at the 2017 signing class, which by the way is probably the greatest signing class in the history of football. They're going. I don't know how many of those guys are going to end up being early round NFL picks, but it's possible as many as 8 guys in that signing class could be first round picks just on the offensive side of the ball, which is insane. But anyway, in that class, there were only 3 players who were not ranked in the ESPN 300. One of them was Mack Jones. The other one was the long snapper who, I mean, even Alabama fans don't know what his name is, but he just won the award for best long snapper in college football. And I don't think he's made a bad snap in however many years he's been the starter. And so it's just having this eye for even the guys who everyone else isn't after, like a Mack Jones. And then the 2019 class, they had 3 guys in that class who were not in the ESPN 300. Those guys were John Mechie, Jaleel Billingsley, who's the second tight end, who I don't know if you've noticed, but he makes a lot of big catches. And I'm not putting him in Kyle Pitts' class, but he's similar to Pitts in that he is a tall, athletic guy who's really tough to match up with, has great hands. And then the other one is the kicker. Here's another thing I don't know if you noticed. Alabama's kicker, despite the nightmares they've had in the last 10 years kicking, he has not missed a kick this season. I believe he's now 14 for 14 on field goals and hasn't missed. I mean, they've probably scored about 100 touchdowns this season. He hasn't missed an extra point. And so those are the 3 guys in that class who were not in the 300, were Mechie, Billingsley, and the kicker. And so even the few times that he signs a guy who everyone else in the country didn't want, those guys have turned out to be impact players. And I think that speaks to, how a program stays on top. It's, you can look at Georgia and say, okay, you can get great players, but there's still something else that makes you the very best. And, this is one of those things for Alabama.
All right, so 8.5. You going Bama? Where are we going here?
Yeah, I mean, I like I said at the beginning, I think so much of it has to do with Ohio State's health. And, are they full strength? It seems to me that there's a better than average chance that they're not.
Right.
We'll know as we get closer to kickoff. And I think if they're not, I would lean toward Alabama winning this game by 2 scores. If Ohio State is at full strength, and if Justin Fields plays as well as he did against Clemson, and by the way, that might have been the best performance of his career, it probably was. If he does that again, and they do that again, then I think it's a one-possession game that they would have a chance to win. But when you put it that way, it's like, okay, so you think that basically everything has to go perfectly for Ohio State to stay within a touchdown and have a chance? And I'm saying, yeah, that's pretty much what I think. So I would say, there's a better than 50% chance Alabama's winning this game by more than a touchdown. But look, this is you mentioned the recruiting rankings where, it's Georgia and Alabama. Well, third on that list would be Ohio State.
Sure.
Over the last 4 years. So this is one of the few teams in the country that has the guys to match up with them across the board. And then on the NFL level, as far as player development and what do they turn out to be, Ohio State is second to Alabama in putting guys into the league.
Right.
So this is from a talent standpoint is as good of a team as they will face. And I think the fact that they're favored by 8 just says more about Alabama than anything else.
Brad Edwards, College Game Day on ESPN Radio. Bama and Ohio State tonight. If Saban wins, this will be his 7th national title. That is just remarkable with the way the game is set up today.
It's not just that it would be 7, but it would be 7 in his last 16 seasons as a college head coach. and let's not forget, he also had 2 seasons in there where he lost in the championship game. One of those was a touchdown with 1 second to go.
Yeah.
And he's pretty much been, I think Chris Felica tweeted this, the Bear, a lot of people might know him as on Game Day. I think he tweeted this last week that over the last, I think it's 12 seasons, or maybe even 13 seasons, going back to 2008, that Alabama has played 7 games, 7 over the last 13 seasons that they did not enter the national championship game. Excuse me, they didn't enter the game in the national championship race.
Wow.
Think about that. In the last 13 years, they have only taken the field 7 times, basically knowing that they were out of the national championship race.
Unbelievable.
And so you start looking at things like the kick 6 and stuff like that, like in some of the seasons they didn't win, and it's just 13 straight years that they have been a contender, even when they didn't get to the game, and it's been an amazing run, and I don't know how much longer it'll go. I tell you what, the whole COVID situation and him having the one game that he had to be at home. And of course, he also had the false alarm, the false positive test before the Georgia game where he was at home for a few days. And I got the impression that he didn't enjoy being at home, and his wife didn't enjoy him being at home either. And I think, if anything, that might have told him, hey, you know what, I'm not close to retiring because I don't like this sitting at home stuff.
No, I agree with you.
That might be bad news for the rest of the country. He could stay at this for another 5 to 10 years.
Brad Edwards on the Abita Amber guest line. Blake, you have a question for Brad Edwards.
Yeah, Brad, we talked about this earlier on the show, and it's obviously a common theme, but the Saban dynasty, the Belichick dynasty, and Michael Jordan warped the fan perception of success and what we deem as successful, right? It's championship or bust. Anything short of a title and you're not successful. So when you look at what Saban has done and the fact that Trevor Lawrence only got 1, and I kind of jokingly said earlier in this show, well, I guess Clemson's no longer a dynasty, right? They haven't won one, right? So when you look at what Saban's done, how do you then, how big an impact does that have when you look at Mullen, Kirby, all these other guys, or the guys that we are judging now based on this unrealistic expectation that's never going to happen again in the
yeah.
history of the sport.
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, it's not, it's not just Auburn within the state, but it's really the rest of the SEC. Everyone's being judged against Alabama, and you're right, it's unrealistic because you got to take a step back and realize that this has never been done in the history of college football, and it can't last much longer. You wouldn't think. And at some point, Alabama will come back to the pack, and life will get back to normal. Although you look around college football, and on the conference level, you've had Clemson has won 6 straight ACC titles. Oklahoma has won 6 straight Big 12 titles. Ohio State, like Alabama, has won 5 of the last 7 in its conference. And so there's a lot of domination going around. And it's probably not good for the sport. And I hope that at some point it becomes more competitive, but you're right. It's kind of warped the perception of not only what success is, but I think it's really discouraged a lot of programs out there that are maybe, not in that second tier as far as their ability to even come close to competing. And one other thing I'll throw out on this is it's even warped, the way that we look at Alabama and Saban, because if they were to lose this game tonight, when we look at the recruiting class rankings and the number of guys they put into the NFL and, the percentage of games they've won, if they lose this game, people will start to make an argument that, maybe Alabama has underachieved under Saban. I mean, I'm serious.
I know. I know.
You'll look at this and you'll say, okay, they probably should have won more national championships than they have.
Oh.
And you've got you saw the award show a few days ago, and they won. On offense, it's not just everything Devontae won, but they won best center. Alex Leatherwood wins the Outland for best interior lineman. They win the quarterback award, the running back award, and it is Sark won the best assistant coach award. They have just taken home everything that there is, and they're setting records that they're converting 60% on third down this season, which is just absolutely insane. And you look at all of that, and if they don't win this game tonight, this offense is going to go down as kind of an afterthought in Alabama football history.
Oh, wow.
It's just everything involves winning. You have to win. And if you don't, the whole season was a waste of time.
Our friend, another great segment, Brad Edwards, College Game Day on ESPN. Thanks, Brad. Enjoy the game tonight, buddy.
All right, guys. Take care.
Brad Edwards joined us on the Abita Andy Gator guest line. Hope you enjoyed the national title game tonight. Bama and Ohio State. Get you some red beans and rice going, or some nachos, or whatever it is you want to dive into. The show is powered by USA Pawn's mega store. USA Pawn's mega store, I-55 South, McDowell Road. For all your tools, electronics, and firearms, USA Pawn. If you missed anything, hit the podcast. Go to Apple Podcast, search The Out of Bounds Show. Facebook, search The Out of Bounds Show. See you tomorrow.